This is the history of protest songs in the United States. Part 8. The 20th Century. In the 20th century, the Union Movement, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, and the war in Vietnam all inspired protest songs. 1960s, Peace and Revolution. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s often used Negro spirituals as a source of protest, changing the religious lyrics to suit the political mood of the time. The use of religious music helped to emphasize the peaceful nature of the protest. It also proved easy to adapt, with many improvised call-and-response songs being created during marches and sit-ins. Some imprisoned protesters used their incarceration as an opportunity to write protest songs. These songs were carried across the country by freedom riders, and many of these became civil rights anthems. Many soul singers of the period, such as Sam Cooke, "A Change Is Gonna Come," 1965, Otis Redding and Aretha Franklin, Respect, James Brown, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," 1968. "I don't want nobody to give me nothing, open up the door, I'll get it myself," 1969, Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions, "We're a Winner," 1967, and Nina Simone, "Mississippi Goddam," 1964. To Be Young, Gifted and Black, 1970, wrote and performed many protest songs which addressed the ever-increasing demand for equal rights for African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. The predominantly white music scene of the time also produced a number of songs protesting racial discrimination, including Janice Ian's "Society's Child, Baby I've Been Thinking," in 1966, about an interracial romance forbidden by a girl's mother and frowned upon by her peers and teachers, and a culture that classifies citizens by race. Steve Reich's 13-minute-long "Come Out," 1966, which consists of manipulated recordings of a single spoken line given by an injured survivor of the Harlem Race Riots of 1964, protested police brutality against African Americans. In late 1968, Sly and the Family Stone released the single, "Everyday People," which became the band's first #1 hit. "Everyday People" was a protest against prejudices of all kinds, and popularized the catchphrase, "Different strokes for different folks." The Family Stone featured Caucasians Greg Errico and Jerry Martini in its lineup, as well as females Rose Stone and Cynthia Robinson, making it the first major integrated band in rock history. Sly and the Family Stone's message was about peace and equality through music, and this song reflects the same. In the 1960s and early 1970s, many protest songs were written and recorded condemning the war in Vietnam, most notably "Simple Song of Freedom" by Bobby Darin, 1969. "I Ain't Marching Anymore" by Oaks, 1965. "Lyndon Johnson Told the Nation" by Tom Paxton, 1965. "Bring Them Home" by Seeger, 1966. "Requiem for the Masses" by The Association, 1967. "Saigon Bride" by Baez, 1967. "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy" by Seeger, 1967. "Suppose They Give a War and No One Comes" by the West Coast Pop Art. Experimental Band, 1967. The Fish, "Cheer I Feel Like I Am Fixin' to Die Rag" by Country Joe and the Fish, 1968. "The Unknown Soldier" by The Doors, 1968. "One Tin Soldier" by Original Cast, 1969. "Volunteers" by Jefferson Airplane, 1969, Fortunate Son, by Creedence Clearwater Revival, 1969, and the album Back to the World by Curtis Mayfield. Woody Guthrie's son Arlo Guthrie also wrote one of the decade's most famous protest songs in the form of the 18-minute-long talking blues song, Alice's Restaurant Massacre, a bitingly satirical protest against the Vietnam War draft. As an extension of these concerns, artists started to protest the ever-increasing escalation of nuclear weapons and threat of nuclear warfare, as for example on Tom Lehrer's So Long, Mom, a song for World War III. Who's Next? About nuclear proliferation, and Wernher von Braun, from his 1965 collection of political satire songs That Was the Year That Was. Folk blues singer Barbara Dane's protest albums during the Vietnam War included Songs of the GI Resistance, with active duty GIs, and I Hate the Capitalist System. The latter included the track, The Kent State Massacre, written by Jack Warshaw. Warshaw, a draft resistor exiled in the UK, wrote several anti-Vietnam songs during his period with the Critics Group specifically for their Off Limits series of radio shows aimed at GIs in Vietnam. In the mid-70s, Warshaw wrote, If They Come in the Morning, aka No Time for Love, recorded and widely popularized by Irish group Moving Hearts from 1980. In Jamaica, the ravages of poverty and racism were not lost upon the youth movement there. The birth of reggae music addressed issues of all kinds, but it can be argued that Bob Marley had perhaps the most impact on a generation there, with songs addressing his views on nuclear proliferation and slavery in his famous Redemption song, recorded shortly before his premature death shortly afterward. The song urges listeners to emancipate yourself from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our minds. The 1960s also saw a number of successful protest songs from the opposite end of the spectrum, the political right, which supported the war. Perhaps the most successful and famous of these was The Ballad of the Green Berets, 1966, by Barry Sadler, then an active-duty staff sergeant in the United States Army Special Forces, which was one of the very few songs of the era to cast the military in a positive light and yet become a major hit. Merle Haggard and the Strangers' Okie from Muskogee, 1969, despite being strongly nationalistic, was listed in Pop Matters' July 2007 list of the top 65 protest songs because it is, as the webzine puts it, in fact a protest against changing social mores, alternative lifestyles, and, well, protests. In a time when protest songs filled the airwaves, it is ironic that Haggard scored his biggest hit protesting the rise of a discontented culture. The Youngbloods, best known for the song Get Together, subsequently recorded Hippie from Olima in response to and satirizing Haggard. To prevent any ambiguity about who its intended target was, the song contained the line, We still takin' strangers if they're Haggard. She Not Chavin wrote the vulgar parody, Asshole from El Paso, in response to Haggard's song as well. Though originally and still largely Cuban, Nueva Trova became popular across Latin America, especially in Puerto Rico in the 1960s. The movement's biggest stars included Puerto Ricans such as Roy Brown, Andres Jimenez, Antonio Caban Vale, and the group Haciendo Punto and Otro Son.